It's a few days before Christmas, and I'm going to take you on a walk around Washington, D.C. to see some of the holiday lights and decorations. If you're new around here, hello! My name is Rob. I'm a tour guide and the founder of Trip Hacks DC Tours. So I'm going to swing around to the other side of the camera and we'll get started. I always like starting these nighttime walks here at the Washington Monument because it's so brightly lit. It's the tallest building in the city. You can see it from miles and miles away. And it is the tallest building in the city, in fact. It was the tallest in the world when it first opened in 1884. And directly to the east, off in the distance, you can see the U.S. Capitol. So tonight's walk will start here at the Washington Monument. It will end over at the U.S. Capitol, but not taking a straight line to get over there today. We're going to stop and see many of the holiday decorations along the way. So I don't think every single monument in Washington, D.C. is worth seeing at night. I do think the Washington Monument is one of them, though. The Washington Monument, World War II Memorial, and Lincoln Memorial. Those are the three that I think. If you're going to come out here after dark, if you want to see the monuments at night, those are the three to focus on. So let me tell you about the night I'm recording this. It's obviously during the holiday season. It's Wednesday, December 21st, which means it's the shortest day of the year. It means that it's the first day of winter. And it's a bit chilly out here. Temperature is about 37 degrees Fahrenheit, or at least that's what it said on my phone before I started. Fortunately, light winds tonight. I don't mind a brisk day in Washington, D.C., but when it's windy, when you get those wind chills, that's when it can start to feel pretty cold. It's about 6:30 p.m. right now. Obviously, it's already completely dark. December has the shortest days of the year. Sunset in December every single day is before 5 o'clock p.m. And unfortunately, you probably can't really see from this far away, but unfortunately, you can see the Lincoln Memorial off in the distance, and normally where you would see in front of it the water at the World War II Memorial. You don't see that tonight because the water is now officially off for the year. So this happens every winter. As soon as we get to the point of the year when temperatures start dropping below 32 degrees, they go below freezing, a lot of the water in Washington, D.C. gets turned off, and it's off until next spring. So the World War II Memorial, unfortunately, it really is a spectacular monument to see after dark, but it doesn't have quite the same feel when the water is turned off for the winter. So the good news is I recorded over the summer a midnight walk around these monuments. It was just as dark, but it was at midnight, and you can check out the video description. When I get back and I post this video, I will make sure I leave a link in the video description to that. So in the past 2 years, past 2 seasons, I've actually done these holiday lights as a live stream. And I was planning on doing that again this year. I was planning on doing it this upcoming Saturday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. But there is an Arctic blast hitting parts of the country right now. And so that's probably going to be here by Friday, which means this weekend, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it's going to be extremely cold. And the tricky thing about doing live streams is that I have to, maneuver the phone. I have to be able to follow the comments to change the camera direction. And so when it gets really cold, my fingers really start to freeze, and it's hard to do that. So unfortunately, with temperatures below freezing this upcoming weekend, I don't think I'm going to be able to pull it off. So that's why I'm doing this instead. And so this is a little bit different than the typical live stream. The live streams, I'm able to interact with the audience and such. But if you have any thoughts about the holiday lights this year, about what I'm showing you, go ahead and leave a comment and let me know, because Saturday's forecast is going to be in the 20s, and I know for some people watching that might sound downright tropical, depending on where in the country or the world you're watching from. But a little too cold for a live stream. Now, straight up ahead, now I see some sirens. I see some lights. It looks a little bit like a motorcade, but it's not. It's not definitely not the president or the vice president's motorcade. This one looks like A few buses getting a police escort here. Now, I don't know who this is. But I will say that this morning I was checking the news and I saw that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, has traveled to the U.S., has traveled to Washington, D.C. I think he already visited the White House earlier today and is going to give an address to Congress tonight. I don't think that has started yet. And so it'll actually be interesting by the time we get over to the Capitol to see if it's open or if they have it closed down because he's there. I'm really hoping that it's open because I want to get up close to the Capitol Christmas tree and show you all the holiday lights and all of the holiday sites. But it's always a possibility that when someone like that is in town that things are a little more restricted than they usually are. By the way, back to the topic of doing the live streams in the winter, I have not found a pair of gloves that gives me the dexterity to keep the gloves on and use the phone at the same time. So if you know of a good pair of gloves that can do that, leave a comment and let me know because I really would like to know. Now, if the video looks dark to you at times, that's because it's dark out here. It's night. The sun went down over an hour ago. And I want to try to make this look as realistic to you as to what you would get if you visited in real life. Some parts of the National Mall, some parts of the park, they are quite dark. Other parts of this walk are more well lit, especially when we get over to the Christmas trees, especially when we get over towards the Willard Hotel. That part is much more brightly lit. So you'll see a lot of the buildings over there look quite bright, and then, walking in the park, walking through the ellipse, it looks fairly dark because that's how I see it. I'm going to edit this as minimally as possible. So I don't want to go cranking up the ISO on the camera, or I don't want to go cranking up in the editing software to make it look really bright. I want you to be able to experience what I'm seeing here. And so if you think, wow, it looks pretty dark, it's because it is. So I actually very rarely do video work at night because it's really hard to do a good job without professional cameras and professional tools. So if you're digging this video, which I made using pretty basic video tools, if you could do me a favor and press the like button so that I know that this whole thing was worthwhile, it really would help me out quite a bit if you did that. Now, right in front of us, this is the National Menorah. It's a large Hanukkah menorah here on the ellipse. This has been a tradition here since 1979. Jimmy Carter was the president who did the first ceremonial lighting of the National Menorah, then in 79. However, it's the president who came after him, Reagan, who is credited with calling it the National Menorah. Now, despite the name, this is not the largest menorah in the country or in the world. For that, you'll need to go to New York City and find the menorah that's on Fifth Avenue near Central Park, right on the corner of Central Park and Fifth Avenue. Thing is, a lot of things in Washington, D.C. are called the National this or the National that. You've got the National Mall, the National Zoo, the National Cathedral. And some people assume that when something is called the National, it means that it's the biggest. The National Zoo is not the biggest zoo, not even close. The National Mall is not the biggest park, not even close. And another misconception is that the word national refers to something that's government run. So obviously the National Cathedral doesn't fit that criteria either. But the dictionary definition for national just is common or characteristic to the country as a whole, to the whole nation. So the National Menorah, in this case, it's a menorah for all those in the whole nation who celebrate Hanukkah. Now the building right up ahead and to the left, that's the American Red Cross headquarters. Obviously, the headquarters for the organization itself, office building, office space. It's also a memorial to women who served in the Civil War. Now, the Red Cross itself, very interesting history if you're not too familiar with it. It was founded after the Civil War as a way to provide disaster relief and medical support to military forces and their families. And to this day, they still provide those services, right? So after a big national disaster like a hurricane, the Red Cross will be there. If you've ever donated blood, chances are decent that it was at an American Red Cross event. So they're still a big part of society, and their history goes way back. Now, straight up ahead is the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, or the EEOB, as many people who work there call it. It is an office building for staff who work for the White House. And let's have a little sneak peek of the National Christmas tree here before I continue on with the EEOB. We're getting closer. We're getting closer. And it looks pretty bright from back here. You also see some smaller trees around. I'll show you what those are when we get closer. But also want to just get a view of it from a distance so you can compare and contrast what it looks like from back here and what it looks like when we get closer up. And also get a view of the National Menorah from back here too. Now the National Menorah, obviously, the lighting ceremony was on the first day of Hanukkah, which was last weekend, and it stays lit for the entirety of Hanukkah, which this year actually overlaps with Christmas. It doesn't always overlap with Christmas, and next year it won't. It'll be earlier in December. So this year it just so happens that on the day I came out to do my live walk and see or rather my recorded walk and see the holiday decorations, the National Menorah was on display. But anyway, turning back to the EEOB, if you've ever watched the show Veep, you might recognize it because that's where a lot of the early seasons are set. The vice president's office was in there, and it was originally the Department of State, Navy, and War building. The DoD, they eventually got their own office space over at the Pentagon, the world's largest office building. But when the EEOB opened in the 1800s, a lot of people really hated it. They hated it, and they were not shy about telling the architect how much they disliked it. So it's hard to look at it now and think, wow, this is an ugly building, because compared to some other buildings in DC, it's hardly the worst in my opinion. But at the time, many people did not dig it. So I'm actually working on a short video right now where I rounded up some of the nasty comments that people said about it back then. So stay tuned for that. Well, let's go ahead and start talking about the National Christmas Tree, which is by far the most popular Christmas tree in DC. It's almost a century-old tradition. So the first National Christmas Tree was decorated and lit in 1923. And the story of the National Christmas Tree is actually pretty interesting. The idea for a National Christmas Tree came from a guy named Frederick Morris Fecker. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. I'm terrible at pronouncing. But he was an electrical engineer, and he had previously worked at General Electric, one of the largest corporations at the time, and one of the largest corporations that sold light bulbs at the time. So inside the White House there, obviously the president lives there, and Fecker had this grand idea that what if we put a Christmas tree right next to the White House and convinced the president, who at the time was Calvin Coolidge, convinced him to come out and have a big celebration and light up the Christmas tree with electric light bulbs. Now, nowadays, we take for granted that electric light bulbs are the only way you would ever consider lighting a Christmas tree, but before this, people would light their Christmas trees with candles and other such lights, which is yes, extremely dangerous as you might imagine. But lighting it with electric bulbs was really important because the Society for, I believe it's called the Society for Electrical Development, which is basically like a lobbying group, they wanted to encourage people to buy electric light bulbs. And what better way to show how great and awesome electric light bulbs are than to basically have the President of the United States endorse it. So the story from here, it's kind of long, it's kind of boring, but basically they really wanted Calvin Coolidge to be involved. And eventually they were successful through a series of intermediaries and people who brokered deals. They got a meeting with the president and they convinced him to have this ceremony. So in 1923, the first National Christmas Tree Lighting Ceremony happened right here. And the president, ever since, has attended that ceremony. So the National Tree Lighting Ceremony, it usually happens either the last week in November or the first week in December. Depends on exactly when Thanksgiving falls. This year it happened at the very end of November, and it usually happens on a weeknight. The president and first lady, and sometimes first family, depending on who's in the White House, will come out, and there'll be a stage, and the president will give a short little remark, and then there's like a host, an MC, and they have musicians and they have dancers, and it's basically just a show. They record it and they play it on TV. So this year I didn't attend it. I never attend it because I always forget to enter the lottery. You have to enter the lottery to get tickets to attend, and I always forget. But they do record it. They did play it on TV, I think on CBS, like a week later. So I did watch it. It's really not that special of a show. I mean, they have some, fairly well-known musical acts and such, but it's if you missed it, I wouldn't feel too bad about it, is what I'll say about that. Now, this over here, this is, like I said, the Pathway of Peace, the smaller Christmas trees from the states and territories. Back over here, that's a nativity. If you can't really see, that's a nativity back there. So one thing I wish they did in 2020, 2 years ago, so the first, Christmas during COVID, they kind of rearranged the Pathway of Peace here and created a big, what I called a selfie station here in the back. And that meant that it was a lot more room for people to kind of line up for their selfies or their photos in front of the tree. And I have no idea why they didn't bring that back, because I thought that was a really good idea and just really helped to disperse these crowds. One thing about the National Christmas Tree that I don't love is just how crowded it is. I mean, this person here has a full-blown tripod and ring light or some kind of light. So yeah, stuff like this. I mean, everybody wants to get a photo with the National Christmas Tree because it's iconic, but it's so packed over here. It can be hard to enjoy. It can be hard to, get a photo yourself. It can be hard to navigate around with everyone else trying to take their own photos. And so it's the most popular tree in DC. It's nice. I mean, it looks nice, but I just wish there was more room to spread out. I wish they brought back that selfie station. So if anyone who makes these decisions is watching, that's my request there. If you want to get the official White House Christmas tree ornament, you can pick that up right here at this stand. They have that for sale. You can also order it online. I believe the the White House Historical Association is responsible for the official White House Christmas tree. I own a few myself. I don't collect them. I don't have one from every single year, but I do have a few of them. They are much nicer than any kind of ornament you would get at a gift store or one of those stands on the side of the road. It's a really nice looking ornament. So if you're looking for a gift, a souvenir, something like that, not a bad choice. Not a bad choice if you go for the official White House ornament. So I'm walking out towards 15th Street right now. This is one of the ways you can enter and exit if you want to see the National Christmas Tree. To my left is the Treasury Building. I'll take a peek over there in a moment. And the Treasury is, the oldest department in the federal government. And people nowadays, I feel like people who know about it because of the show Hamilton, which is great. I'm glad that people know about history when they might not have before. So the Treasury Building right over there. There is a statue of Alexander Hamilton out there. His statue is basically facing towards me right now. So he's looking south. And sometimes I joke on my tours when we're at the Jefferson Memorial that Jefferson, the statue of Thomas Jefferson, he is looking to the north, and most tour guides would tell you he's looking at the White House, which is right next door. But maybe, just maybe, he's looking not at the White House, but having a little staring duel with his old rival, Alexander Hamilton, because Hamilton is looking south, Jefferson is looking north, and Hamilton's statue was built first. So the Hamilton statue existed before the Jefferson Memorial was built. So is it just a funny coincidence that they're looking at each other across the park? Or did they do it that way and create some hidden symbolism for anyone who is paying attention? Just something to think about. I'm sure it's probably just a coincidence. So the Treasury Building is one of the oldest buildings in the city. So George Washington was the first president, and George Washington served his presidency in Philadelphia, which was the capital, while Washington, D.C. was under construction. And then John Adams was the second president, and he got the call one day, and they said, "President Adams, the White House is ready. Come on down, bring the government down to Washington, D.C." So in 1800, they got to Washington, D.C., and It was still under construction, let's just say. So the Treasury building was one of the few buildings in town that was actually open and ready to go. And so most federal government employees, which at that time there were not very many, this was a long time ago, much smaller government, they were working out of the Treasury building from the start. Unfortunately, there was a fire shortly after. But the upside to that is that modifications were made to the building to make it more quote-unquote fireproof, which turned out quite handy because just a few years after that, 1814, the British came and they burned Washington. So having a fireproof building actually wound up being quite handy. So even though most tourists will never go inside this building, it is one of the oldest and the most historic buildings in town. Now, to my right, across the street, it's too dark to be able to see it, but across there is the newest national memorial in Washington, D.C. It's the National World War I Memorial. It's barely over a year old. It opened in 2021. And when it opened, there was not much of a ceremony. There wasn't really any pomp and circumstance. And that's just for the kind of sad yet obvious reason that there are no living World War I veterans anymore. So I have a full-blown podcast episode where I talk about this and other lesser-known monuments. I don't really talk about this memorial much otherwise. It is not included on TripX DC Monuments Tours. And technically, it's not even done yet. There's a really large relief right in the middle that's called A Soldier's Journey, and it's actually scheduled to be installed in 2024. So it's not even entirely finished yet. All right, well, let's talk about the building that's straight ahead, brightly lit. That is the Willard Hotel. This is one of my favorite hotels in Washington, D.C. And since I live in D.C., I don't really stay in hotels. So from the perspective of a visitor, if I was thinking about where would I want to stay, the Willard is truly a top-notch location. It's right across the street from the White House. It's walkable to the museums, walkable to the monuments, the Capitol, pretty much all the major downtown tourist sites. And as far as Christmas time goes, I think this is the best, most festive place you can stay. So if you're coming in December between Thanksgiving and Christmas, or Thanksgiving and the end of the year, and you see a rate at the Willard that you say, yeah, I can splurge on that, go for it. Now, in my previous live streams from last year and the year before, I actually did not go inside the Willard Hotel because I wasn't sure if I'd have reception. But since I'm recording this offline, let's go in and check it out. So, very old hotel, historic lobby, nice Christmas tree in here. Like I said, just you get the holiday vibes when you go in here around this time of year. Now, of course, every hotel probably has a Christmas tree in the lobby, but I don't know. This one just has the vibes that feel different from other hotels. And actually, turns out I came in while they're doing some caroling over there in the corner, so I'll go check that out in a moment. I'm not going to walk around the hotel. Just wanted to pop into the lobby and show you a little peek, little sneak peek, a little taste of what it's like to be in here at this time of year. I used to do a Christmas time tour, and one of the stops was in here at the Willard for a hot beverage. But haven't done that tour in a few years due to COVID and for other reasons, but there we go. There's the carolers back there. Not entirely sure who these people are, but I don't really have time to stick around and find out. But fun that they are in there. There's also the Round Robin Bar here, a very historic bar. Before presidential security got really tight, a bunch of presidents were known to like hanging out here at the Willard. So probably the best known is Ulysses S. Grant, who allegedly liked to come here and smoke his cigars and drink whiskey at the bar. And then probably the most notable Willard guest was Martin Luther King Jr., who stayed here in 1963 and wrote his famous I Have a Dream speech from his hotel room. And then on the day of the march, went over to the Lincoln Memorial and delivered the speech, which is now one of the most famous speeches in all of U.S. history. And if you come on a Trip XDC Monuments Tour, I can show you the spot, the exact spot, where Martin Luther King and all the other speakers from that day stood and delivered their speeches out to the crowd of tens of thousands of people who came out to hear them. So this is 14th Street right here, kind of a busy street. It takes a moment to cross, but I'm going to go past a couple of theaters over the next block. This is kind of like Washington, D.C.'s little theater district here. And most people, I feel like, who think of theater in Washington, D.C., they think of the Kennedy Center, which is a relatively newer theater. It's about 50 years old, and it definitely has top-notch performances there. So if you get a chance to see a show at the Kennedy Center, absolutely go for it. But before the Kennedy Center was built, if you wanted to go see a show, it was in this part of town. So I personally feel like, Washington, D.C. isn't a place where people think of going to see a show. They don't think, oh, I'm going to D.C., I should check out the musical theater that's happening. And that's kind of too bad. I think, the theater scene here punches way above its weight. Obviously, it's not as famous or well-known as Broadway in New York City. And I've been to Broadway. I've been to New York City. It's amazing. But the shows you can see here, they're often pretty great. And the traveling versions of Broadway shows, a lot of times the acting is just as good. I recently learned that when you see the traveling version of a Broadway show, you're not actually getting the B team. You're not getting the backup cast. A lot of times you're getting the best actors. So I think that's really cool. Now this is the National Theater, straight up ahead. And again, the term national comes up on this virtual tour. This theater is not affiliated with the government, nor is it the biggest theater around. It's just named the National Theater. There is not anything playing right now, at least I don't think there is. I don't see any signs up for any shows happening at this moment. Obviously, there was just an advertisement up there for Cats, which is coming in January. So even though Ford's Theater, which is only a few blocks away, is better known for all the wrong reasons, Abraham Lincoln himself did come see shows here at the National Theater. So that kind of gives you a sense of how old it is, and also just its proximity right next to the White House, obviously a popular place where someone like President Abraham Lincoln would want to go. So I did check out the 2023 schedule before I came out here, and like I said, they have Cats next month. They're going to have Aladdin in the spring, and then Hadestown in the summer. Of those, I'd probably be the most interested in Hadestown, but if you're into musical theater, maybe they all sound good. Now on this block here, this is the Warner Theater, which is currently showing the Nutcracker, the Washington Ballet, doing the Nutcracker, as they do every year around the holidays. And it looks like there are a whole bunch of people lined up to get into the show, as I think it should be starting pretty soon. So the Warner Theater here, so this one, Abraham Lincoln did not attend shows here because it didn't exist yet. This was built during the Roaring 20s, and they originally showed live vaudeville, and they showed silent films. So over the years, it's obviously been renovated a few times. They switched from a movie theater to a live performance venue, and now it's used for live performances. So that includes plays, that includes concerts, that includes comedy shows. If it's something that you can see live, then it's something you might be able to see at the Warner. Now, right behind me and kind of to the right there is Freedom Plaza, which is a really interesting but kind of hard space to describe without really showing it to you, and it's hard to see in the dark. But I did record an entire podcast episode about Pennsylvania Avenue, and this was a topic of discussion. So I recommend, if you're curious about Freedom Plaza, to listen to that. It's a popular space for protests, for civic events. It's also really popular with skateboarders. So if you come here in the summer, you'll often find a bunch of people riding around the plaza on skateboards. Otherwise, it's really not a very attractive tourist site, to be honest. There's not really much shade. It's not a very relaxing place, but they are talking about potentially making some improvements to it, so stay tuned. That's the old post office tower straight ahead. One of my favorite views in DC is from the top of the tower. Now, you can't go there at night. It is a daytime activity, but it is an alternative to the Washington Monument. If you aren't able to get tickets to the Washington Monument, or just don't want to get tickets to the Washington Monument, you can go up to the old post office tower and check that out. One thing, take a look straight ahead and up. That's the Ukrainian flag flying next to the U.S. flag and D.C. flag on the flagpole. This is a tradition we have when there's an important president, prime minister, foreign dignitary in town. We fly the flag of their country here in D.C. So, for example, a few weeks ago, the president of France visited, or rather, was that a few months? That was about a few weeks, maybe a month ago. So there were French flags flying here in D.C. This is a virtual tour of the holiday lights, and we're about to go on a section of Pennsylvania Avenue that's a little dull Christmas-wise. So through the magic of editing, I'm gonna flip forward and meet you down on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. So still on Pennsylvania Avenue, and we are at the Canadian Embassy, one of my favorite Christmas trees in Washington, D.C. This is the only embassy on this section of Pennsylvania Avenue. Canada has had this embassy on this location actually only since 1989. For most of U.S. and Canadian history, their embassy was over on Embassy Row, which is near where most of the other embassies are located. Now, when you come here to see the Christmas tree and to see their Christmas lights, the key is you have to kind of go around. So there's a giant staircase right on Pennsylvania Avenue, but they often have it blocked off. So you have to go around to the side and then up these stairs on this side. So you can see it's right in front of me, that where these lights are, it's blocked off. But just come around to the side. I've never not been able to get in here and see the tree. And I mean, wow, just look at this thing. Isn't this amazing? I think this might be one of the classiest Christmas trees in DC. It's got red and white lights because Canada, of course, but I really like the kind of green accent lights that they do on the columns there. You know, red, white, and green for Christmas. It's just perfect, in my opinion. I am a big fan of this Christmas tree. Now, when the Canadian government purchased this land in the 70s, all they got was a vacant lot. And that's because there was, at that time, nothing here, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me, because it's such a prime piece of real estate. It's barely a stone's throw from the Capitol. You can see the Capitol right over there. And for most of U.S. history, for most of D.C. history, it was just an underdeveloped piece of land. And at one point, it was a used car lot, of all things. Actually, if you watch my video about Georgetown, there was once a used car lot where the old stone house stands right now. So, I don't know, something about extremely valuable real estate here and used car lots. We don't really have used car lots anymore. The land is far too valuable, but I think Canada has a much nicer looking embassy here in D.C. than the U.S. does in Ottawa. I've never been to Ottawa, but in all the photos I've seen, it looks like the U.S. embassy is pretty fortress-like and not very inviting like this one is here. So if you've been to Ottawa and you've been to the U.S. embassy there, let me know. Is my inclination right? Is it nicer than it looks in the photos? Leave a comment, let me know. By the way, if you're enjoying this virtual tour, make sure to press the thumbs up button on the video and leave a comment and let me know, because this is the second of these virtual tours that I've made, and it's always hard to know when something is new, whether people like it and whether people want to see more. And so if you want me to make more of these, make sure to leave a comment and let me know, because that's the only way that I'm going to know. To the right, on the other side of the street, that's the National Gallery of Art. Specifically, it's the East Building, which houses the modern and contemporary art, including a large blue rooster on the roof. Definitely modern and contemporary as far as art goes. The National Gallery of Art is not part of the Smithsonian. So I know I've said this several times in some of my videos, but believe it or not, the federal government runs two distinct museum institutions, the Smithsonian and the National Gallery of Art. And just because it's not part of the Smithsonian does not make it any less great. If you're an art lover, the National Gallery of Art is very nice, but it has a different history. It's managed differently, but for most visitors, doesn't really matter. Still a great museum, great place to go see art. So as I make my way down to the Capitol Christmas tree, I want to mention a few other things, a few other Christmassy things that you can do in DC that I didn't cover in this walk, either because it's too far away or didn't have time. The first is Zoo Lights. Zoo Lights is a very fun, very festive thing to do around this time of year. It's extremely popular. It's extremely popular specifically with kids. So if you're a family with kids, definitely something that they would probably enjoy. Doesn't mean you have to have kids to go. I know plenty of adults who have gone and looked at the lights and had a fun time, but it's definitely geared towards families with kids, just for context. Now, lots of zoos will have their version of zoo lights, so I'm not saying that this is particularly unique, but what makes ours different is that the one here is completely free, which means it's also in very high demand. So always get tickets as soon as you can and plan to be around large crowds when you go. All right, let me make my way around this guy who pulled right in front of me. And to the right of the Capitol, or to the right where I'm walking right now, is Season's Greetings at the U.S. Botanic Garden, which is one of my personal favorites. They have poinsettias, they have holiday decorations, they have plant-based recreations of famous DC landmarks like the Capitol, Washington Monument, Supreme Court, the museums, and others. And my personal favorite thing there, probably many people's personal favorite, is the holiday model train. Last year they moved the train outdoors, which I was initially skeptical of because I didn't think it was really, the smartest idea to run a model train outdoors with the weather we get around here. But it is actually a big improvement because there's a lot more space to spread out. And previously when they did the model train indoors, if you went on a busy day, like if you went on the weekend, there'd be a huge line. You'd have to stand in line for a long time to go in and see the train. But now, because there's more room to spread out, I've gotten to see it even on the weekends and didn't have to stand in a big line. They also do typically extended hours for Season's Greetings. So this year they're doing it on Thursday. I went, I believe, the first Thursday, and it was great. I highly recommend extended hours if you can go. In the past, Season's Greetings was one of very few things that was open on Christmas Day. So if you were in DC on Christmas Day, it was always super packed over there because it was like the only thing that was open. And unfortunately, this year, 2022, it will not be open on Christmas Day. So I was just advising my group who is going to be taking a tour with me this upcoming weekend. They asked what they can go do on Christmas Day. They're going to go to Mount Vernon, I think. That is one of the things that is open on Christmas Day. They're open both on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. But unfortunately, the Season's Greetings will not be an option this year. Another thing to do, Georgetown Glow has returned for the holidays this year. So you can pair that with some ice skating at the Georgetown ice skating rink, and I think that's a pretty fun time. All right, so we're getting close. We're getting closer to the Capitol. You can start to see the Capitol Christmas tree. The Capitol Dome is just always stunning. I'm just always so amazed that I get to see this every year whenever I want. And so I'm looking ahead and I see the barriers, I see the barricades up, and I don't see anyone. I don't see any people standing close to the tree. So I think that means that because President Zelensky is in the Capitol, that they have blocked it off, and I will not be going up close to the tree. Well, this is a great example of how when you come to Washington, D.C., you've always got to have some flexibility. You've always got to be willing to accept that at the last minute, the president of Ukraine is going to travel to D.C. and alter your schedule a little bit. And I'm okay with that. I know that that's just how things go around here. So I will try to get as close to the tree as possible and show it to you from as close as I can get. Of course, like I said, I didn't know about this trip until just this morning, although I suppose that makes perfect sense because that is not the kind of thing that you would want to announce in advance. So I think many of us just found out about that this morning. Unlike the National Christmas Tree, which is a permanent tree, this is a cut tree. And this year's tree is from North Carolina. I have a short video about some of the ornaments that are on there if you're curious. But one thing I'll say about this tree before I wrap up is that the most famous Christmas tree in the country is at Rockefeller Center in New York City. And that tree this year is 82 feet tall. And this tree here at the Capitol is 78, only 4 feet shorter. And probably not even noticeable from the ground to most people. So pretty amazing to me because the Rockefeller tree is always ridiculously packed and crowded, and the Capitol tree is just so much more chill. And the backdrop, I mean, this is just unbeatable. I don't think you can beat this. And I'm gonna pop up a few videos on screen right now. If you made it with me this far, then I really appreciate you sticking with me, calling an audible here at the Capitol. And go ahead and watch another TripX DC video, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah. And as I say at the end of all of these, enjoy your trip.